The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Mom made the decision to pack up early. What was supposed to be a long weekend family reunion at the old cabin had turned into a soggy mess of canceled hikes and board games played by lamplight. The power had flickered twice already, and Uncle Jim's weather radio kept crackling warnings about flash flooding on the mountain roads. "We should head back while we still can," she announced, folding towels with the efficiency that had carried her through 2 marriages and countless family crises. "The roads are only going to get worse." I watched from the kitchen window as cousins and aunts loaded cars under umbrellas, their laughter dampened by the steady drumming on the cabin's tin roof. The woods beyond the clearing looked dark and heavy, pine trees swaying like they were trying to shake off the weight of the storm. "Someone needs to stay and lock up properly," Dad said, checking the latches on the storm shutters. "Make sure the pipes don't freeze, secure the deck furniture." That's when Marcus spoke up from where he'd been quietly organizing firewood by the door. "I can handle it. Drive back tomorrow when this clears up." Marcus, my stepbrother for 8 years now, though we'd never quite figured out what that meant. He was 26 to my 23, tall and broad-shouldered in the way that came from actual work rather than gyms. Carpenter's hands, permanent tan lines from rolled sleeves, and this way of moving through space that made you believe he belonged wherever he happened to be standing. "I'll stay too," I heard myself saying, surprising everyone, including myself. "Two people can get it done faster." Mom looked between us with that expression she got when she was trying to read a situation. Marcus and I had never been close, not hostile, just separate, different orbits around the same family sun. "You sure, honey?" she asked me. "It's going to be pretty quiet up here." Quiet. Like that was supposed to scare me. I'd been looking forward to quiet for months, saving up vacation days from my office job downtown just to disappear into these mountains for a few days. The idea of staying longer, of having the cabin to myself, well, mostly to myself, felt like exactly what I needed. "I'm sure." Marcus nodded once, the kind of economical gesture that said more than words. "We'll be fine. Road should be clear by Sunday." An hour later, we stood on the covered porch watching taillights disappear down the muddy drive. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm that seemed to blur the edges of everything: the trees, the time, the careful distance Marcus and I usually maintained around each other. "Well," he said, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Guess it's just us. Just us." The words hung in the air between us like a question neither of us knew how to answer. The cabin felt different with everyone gone. Bigger somehow, but also more intimate. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of floorboards, the whistle of wind through the eaves, the soft tick of the old clock on the mantel. I found myself hyper-aware of Marcus's presence in ways I'd never been before, tracking his movements through the rooms like some internal radar I didn't know I possessed. We worked methodically through Dad's list: drained the outdoor spigots, checked the generator, moved the deck chairs into the shed. Marcus approached each task with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, while I tried to be useful without getting in his way. We developed a rhythm over the years of family gatherings: polite cooperation, minimal conversation, mutual respect for each other's space. But something felt different now. Maybe it was just the circumstances, being alone together for the first time in years, ever. I couldn't actually remember a time when it had been just the two of us, without the buffer of parents or extended family or the natural chaos of group dynamics. "Firewood's getting low," he said around 4 o'clock, nodding toward the rack by the stone fireplace. "I saw a cord of split logs in the shed, but we should probably bring some inside before it gets dark." I followed him out to the woodshed, a lean-to structure attached to the cabin's north side. The rain had eased to a fine mist that seemed to hover in the air rather than fall. Everything smelled like wet pine and earth, rich and clean in a way that made the city feel like something I'd dreamed rather than lived in. Marcus worked with an easy efficiency, loading split logs into the canvas carrier with movements that spoke of years of practice. I watched his hands as he worked, calloused, capable, with a thin scar across the knuckles of his right hand from some long-ago accident with a saw, When he glanced up and caught me staring, I quickly busied myself with stacking kindling. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I've got this." "I know, I want to help." Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or reassessment. "Okay, thanks." We carried the wood inside together, building up the stack by the fireplace. The work was simple, repetitive, but I found myself paying attention to the small details, the way Marcus tested each log for dryness before adding it to the pile, the unconscious grace of his movements, the quiet concentration on his face. He'd always been like this, I realized, present in whatever he was doing, whether it was fixing a broken cabinet or listening to one of Dad's long stories about his Navy days. I was arranging the kindling when I became aware of stillness, that particular quality of quiet that meant someone was watching. I looked up to find Marcus's eyes on me, and for a moment, maybe 3 seconds, maybe an eternity, neither of us looked away. There was something in his gaze I'd never seen before, or maybe never allowed myself to notice. An intensity that made my chest tight and my hands unsteady. It wasn't the polite attention of family obligation or even friendship. It was something else entirely, something that made the air between us feel charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Then he blinked, and the moment shattered. "That should be enough for tonight," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm going to check the roof. Thought I heard water dripping in the back bedroom." He disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with the echo of that look and the unsettling awareness that something fundamental had just shifted between us. Dinner was leftover soup and sandwiches, eaten mostly in comfortable silence while rain drummed against the windows. Marcus had found the leak, a loose shingle that he'd managed to patch temporarily from the inside. "We'd need to fix it properly when the weather cleared," he explained, "but it would hold for now." I watched him talk about flashing and roof pitch and the subtle signs of water damage, noting the way his hands moved to illustrate his points. There was something hypnotic about listening to him explain things he actually understood, so different from the corporate doublespeak that filled my days at the marketing firm downtown. "You're good at this stuff," I said when he finished. "The fixing, I mean, making things work." He shrugged, but I caught a hint of pleasure in his expression. "Had to learn. Mom wasn't exactly handy when I was growing up, and we couldn't afford to call someone every time something broke. It was more personal information than he usually shared. Marcus had always been private about his life before our parents got married, the years when it was just him and his mother in that small apartment across town. I knew the basics. His father had left when he was young, money had been tight, but he rarely talked about it." "What was that like?" I asked. "Being the one who had to figure everything out?" He considered the question while he finished his soup, and I found myself holding my breath, afraid he'd deflect or change the subject the way he usually did when conversations ventured into personal territory. "Lonely," he said finally. "But it made me self-sufficient, I guess. Maybe too much so." The admission hung between us, raw and unexpected. Outside, the wind picked up, sending branches scraping against the cabin sides with sounds like fingernails on wood. "I always envied that about you," I said before I could stop myself. "How comfortable you seemed with yourself. Like you knew exactly who you were and didn't need anyone else's approval." Marcus looked up sharply. "Is that how I seem to you?" "Isn't it true?" "Maybe, but it's not always a good thing." He pushed his empty bowl away and leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes I think I've gotten so used to handling everything alone that I've forgotten how to let people in." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the Marcus I knew from family dinners and holiday gatherings. Polite, pleasant, but fundamentally unreachable. This was someone else entirely, someone more complicated and vulnerable than I'd ever imagined. "People meaning family?" I asked. "Or people in general?" "Both, I guess." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain-dark windows. "Your mom, our mom, she tries. But I always feel like she's still figuring out how to be a mother to someone who was already grown when she met him. And your dad, he's a good man, but we don't have much in common." "What about me?" The question slipped out before I could examine it. Marcus's eyes found mine across the small table, and something flickered there. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You," he said slowly, are harder to figure out. What do you mean? You watch people, really watch them. Most people look without seeing, but you— He shook his head as if he couldn't quite find the words. You see things, notice things. It makes me wonder what you see when you look at me. My heart was beating too fast. What do you think I see? I don't know. That's what makes it complicated. The confession settled between us like something fragile and dangerous. I wanted to tell him what I saw: strength and gentleness in equal measure, a kind of quiet integrity that most people spent their whole lives trying to fake. Hands that could build beautiful things and eyes that held more kindness than he probably knew. But the words felt too big, too revealing. Instead, I stood and started clearing the dishes, needing movement to break the tension that had drawn tight as a wire between us. Let me, Marcus said, reaching for the same plate I was picking up. Our fingers brushed as we both grasped the ceramic edge. Such a small thing, skin touching skin for maybe 2 seconds. But neither of us pulled away immediately. We stood there, hands overlapping on ordinary dishware, and I felt something electric run up my arm and settle somewhere dangerous in my chest. When we finally let go, it was with the careful deliberation of people defusing a bomb. I'll wash, I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. You dry? Okay. We worked side by side at the old kitchen sink, passing plates and glasses between us with exaggerated care not to let our hands touch again. But the awareness remained, of his height next to me, of the way he moved with unconscious grace, of the scent of his soap and sawdust that seemed to follow him everywhere. Do you miss home? I asked as I handed him a clean bowl, partly to fill the silence and partly because I genuinely wanted to know. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I don't even know where that is anymore. The words hit me with unexpected force. I turned to look at him, water still dripping from my hands, and saw something vulnerable in his profile that made my chest ache. What do you mean? I mean, he set the bowl down carefully, precisely, like he was buying time to think. I mean, I've been living in other people's ideas of home for so long that I'm not sure I remember what mine would look like. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. The apartment I rented downtown, the job that paid well but felt meaningless, the careful social circle of college friends who'd gradually become acquaintances, none of it felt like home so much as places where I happened to exist. Maybe home isn't a place, I said. Maybe it's, I don't know, a feeling, a person, something that makes you feel like you belong. Marcus turned to look at me then, really look, and I felt that same electric awareness from earlier multiplied tenfold. His eyes were darker than I remembered, brown shot through with gold, and there was something in them that made my breath catch. Yeah, he said quietly, maybe it is. The storm intensified as evening fell. What had been steady rain became something more aggressive, wind driving water against the windows and sheets, tree branches creaking ominously in the gusts. We built up the fire and settled into the cabin's main room, Marcus in the worn leather armchair Dad favored, me curled into one corner of the couch with a book I couldn't quite focus on. The power flickered twice before finally giving up completely around 9 o'clock, plunging us into the warm amber circle of firelight. Marcus got up to check the generator but came back shaking his head. Something's wrong with the fuel line. I can take a look tomorrow, but for tonight we're on our own. That's okay, I said, surprised to find I meant it. It's kind of nice, actually, peaceful. He settled back into his chair, but I could feel him watching me in the dancing light. The book was hopeless now. I'd read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a word, so I set it aside and just let myself look back. Firelight suited him. It softened the angles of his face while emphasizing the strong line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders. He'd changed into an old flannel shirt after dinner, sleeves rolled up to reveal those carpenter's forearms I'd been noticing all day. There was something almost medieval about the scene. 2 people alone by firelight while a storm raged outside, cut off from the modern world by simple elemental forces. You never talk much, he said suddenly, his voice low and thoughtful. Maybe I'm scared of what I'd say. The admission slipped out before I could stop it, honest in the way that darkness and firelight sometimes demanded. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, and the movement brought him closer to my orbit. What would you say, he asked, if you weren't scared? I looked at him across the space between us, maybe 6 feet of braided rug and shared family history, and something else I didn't have a name for yet. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized I was tired of being careful, tired of measuring every word for its potential to complicate things. I'd say I've been watching you for years, I said. And I'd say I think you've been watching me too, but we've both been pretending we haven't noticed. His stillness was absolute, like he'd stopped breathing. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney, and somewhere in the walls the old cabin creaked against the wind. What else? He asked, and his voice was rougher now, barely above a whisper. I'd say you always acted like I was just a kid, but now... I met his eyes across the firelit space. Now you look at me like you've never really seen me before. Maybe I haven't, he said. Maybe I've been afraid to. The confession hit me like a physical force. I felt my heart rate spike, felt heat that had nothing to do with the fire spread across my skin. This was dangerous territory we were wandering into, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from taking another step forward. Afraid of what? Marcus stood up abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that screamed frustration and uncertainty. He paced to the window, looking out at nothing visible in the storm-black night. You know what? He said to his own reflection in the glass. And I did know. Of course I knew. It was the thing we'd been dancing around all day, maybe for years. This pull between us that had no safe category, no socially acceptable explanation. The way my pulse jumped whenever he was in the room, the way his eyes lingered on me just a beat too long when he thought no one was looking. The careful distance we maintained that somehow only made the awareness more intense. Marcus, I said, and stood up too, though I didn't move toward him, not yet. He turned around, and in the firelight I could see conflict written across his features, want and duty and confusion all mixed together in an expression that was painfully familiar because I wore it myself whenever I looked in the mirror and tried to make sense of what I felt for my stepbrother. This is crazy, he said. We can't. We're family. Are we? The question came out sharper than I intended, because it never felt like family to me, not with you. Something shifted in his face at that. He took a step toward me, then stopped himself. Then what did it feel like? I could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject or retreated into the safe distance we'd maintained for 8 years. Instead, I told him the truth. Like waiting, I said. Like I've been waiting for something to happen between us since the day our parents got married, and I never knew what it was until right now. The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, long and low and somehow inevitable. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something fundamental had changed. Come here, he said quietly. I moved toward him slowly, hyper-aware of every step across the worn wooden floor. When I was close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough to smell the scent of sawdust and rain that clung to his skin, he reached up and touched my face with those carpenter's hands I'd been thinking about all day. You're not a kid anymore, he said, and there was wonder in his voice like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. No, I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not. His thumb traced across my cheekbone, gentle and careful, and I felt something inside me catch fire. Not just desire, though that was there too, sudden and fierce, but something deeper, recognition, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. God help me, he murmured, but I don't want to stop looking at you. Then don't. We were close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the way his pulse jumped at the base of his throat. The space between us felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Do you know what you're asking? He said. Do you know what you're offering? For a moment, we just stood there, teetering on the edge of something that would change everything. Then thunder crashed overhead, loud enough to shake the windows, and we both jumped. The spell broke, and Marcus stepped back, dragging a hand over his face. Jesus, he breathed. What are we doing? I wanted to say we were finally being honest. I wanted to say we were tired of pretending. I wanted to close the distance between us again and find out what his mouth would feel like against mine. Instead, I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to find solid ground. I don't know, I admitted, but I don't want to stop. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him fighting some internal battle. Duty against desire. The right thing against the thing he wanted. The thing we both wanted. We should get some sleep, he said finally. The storm's supposed to clear by morning and we'll have work to do. It wasn't exactly a rejection, but it wasn't acceptance either. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and started toward the stairs that led to the loft where I'd been sleeping. Hey, he called when I was halfway up. I turned back to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Tomorrow, we'll figure this out, whatever this is. Okay, I said, and something in my chest loosened slightly. Tomorrow. But as I lay in the narrow bed upstairs, listening to the storm rage outside and the soft sounds of Marcus moving around below, I knew that tomorrow wouldn't change what had happened between us tonight. Wouldn't change the way he'd looked at me or the way it had felt when he touched my face or the electric current that had run between us in the firelight. If anything, tomorrow would only make it harder to pretend this thing between us didn't exist. I stared at the ceiling and waited for sleep that was a long time coming, while downstairs the fire slowly died to embers and my stepbrother, my not quite brother, my almost something else, did the same. I woke to the sound of chopping. Gray dawn light filtered through the loft window, and the storm had quieted to occasional gusts of wind and the steady drip of water from the eaves. I lay still for a moment, orienting myself to the unfamiliar space and the events of the night before. Had that conversation by the fire really happened? Had Marcus really touched my face and told me he didn't want to stop looking at me? The rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood suggested that at least one of us was approaching the morning with practical purpose. I dressed quickly and made my way downstairs. Through the kitchen window, I could see Marcus in the side yard working through a pile of unsplit logs with methodical efficiency. He'd been up for a while, judging by the size of the stack of split wood beside him and the fact that he'd already started coffee on the camp stove. I poured myself a cup and stepped onto the covered porch to watch him work. He'd stripped down to a t-shirt despite the cool morning air, and I could see the play of muscles across his back as he lifted the axe and brought it down with controlled force. Everything about his movements spoke of years of practice. The way he positioned each log, the smooth arc of the swing, the precise point where steel met wood. It was hypnotic and utterly masculine, and I found myself thinking about those hands again, about the way they'd felt against my skin. He must have sensed my presence because he looked up, axe balanced against his shoulder, and our eyes met across the small yard. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he nodded toward the coffee in my hands. And he left? Full pot. He sank the axe into the chopping block and walked toward me, and I tried not to stare at the way his t-shirt clung to his chest, damp with sweat despite the cool air. When he climbed the porch steps, he was close enough that I could smell the scent of exertion and fresh air that clung to him. "Sleep okay?" he asked, accepting the mug I offered. Eventually. I studied his face, looking for some indication of how he was processing what had happened between us. "You? Not really." He took a long sip of coffee and stared out at the dripping trees. Did a lot of thinking. My stomach clenched. About? About what you said last night. About waiting. He turned to look at me then, and his expression was serious but not regretful. About whether I've been waiting too. And I think maybe I have been, just didn't know what I was waiting for. Relief flooded through me, so strong it left me slightly dizzy. Whatever internal battle he'd been fighting, he hadn't decided to retreat into denial or family obligation. That was something. "So, what now?" I asked. Now I finish splitting this wood and you help me fix that roof properly before the next storm hits. He drained his coffee cup and set it on the porch rail. And we see what happens when we stop pretending there's nothing between us. The matter-of-fact way he said it made my pulse jump, like we were discussing a carpentry project instead of dismantling 8 years of careful boundaries. "Marcus," I started, but he was already heading back toward the woodpile. "Grab the toolbox from the shed," he called over his shoulder. "And maybe another shirt. It's going to be messy work." He was right about the mess. The leak had done more damage than was initially visible, requiring us to pull up several square feet of shingles and replace a section of damaged decking underneath. It was precise work that required coordination, one person holding materials in place while the other measured and cut and nailed, which meant spending the morning in close physical proximity, passing tools back and forth, occasionally steadying each other on the slanted roof. Every incidental touch, his hand on my shoulder as he moved past me, my fingers brushing his as I handed him nails, felt loaded with significance. "Hold this steady," he said around noon, positioning a new piece of plywood over the damaged section. I braced it in place while he marked the corners, acutely aware of how close we were working. His concentration was absolute, brow furrowed as he measured twice and marked his cuts, and I found myself studying the line of his profile against the pale sky. "You're staring again," he said without looking up from his work. Heat flooded my face. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry." He glanced up then, and there was something warm in his expression that made my chest tight. "I've been doing it too." The admission hung between us as he went back to his measuring, and I realized this was how it was going to be now. Acknowledgement instead of pretense, honesty instead of careful distance. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. "Hand me the saw?" he asked, and when I passed it to him, his fingers lingered against mine just long enough to make the point. We worked through the afternoon, making steady progress on the repair. Marcus explained each step as we went, the importance of proper flashing, how to overlap shingles for maximum weather protection, the way water moved across different surfaces. I found myself genuinely interested, not just in the technical details, but in watching him work, seeing the satisfaction he took in solving problems with his hands. "You're good at this," I said as we cleaned up the tools. The roof was weatherproof again, the damaged section replaced with new wood that would gray and blend with the old overteam. "Practice," he said, but I could tell the compliment pleased him. "Your dad asked me to teach you some of this stuff a few years ago, said it would be good for you to know how to fix things." I remember I wasn't interested then. And now? I considered the question as I coiled the extension cord we'd used for the circular saw. Now I think maybe I was interested in the wrong things. Like what? Like impressing people I didn't actually care about, like climbing corporate ladders that led nowhere I wanted to go. I shrugged, surprised by my own honesty, like trying to be someone I'm not. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying me with that intense focus I was beginning to recognize as his way of really listening. "Who are you then?" he asked. "When you're not trying to be someone else?" It was a bigger question than he probably realized. I'd been asking myself the same thing for months, maybe years, sitting in conference rooms and networking events and expensive restaurants, feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's life. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think I'm someone who'd rather spend Saturday afternoon fixing a roof than sitting in another strategy meeting." "Good thing," Marcus said with something that might have been a smile, "because we've got a kitchen window that sticks and the deck railing could use some attention." "Are you offering to teach me? If you want to learn." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. He was offering more than carpentry lessons. He was offering time together, shared projects, a reason to exist in each other's space without the careful choreography of family gatherings. "I want to learn," I said, and meant it in every way possible. We spent the rest of the afternoon on smaller repairs, adjusting the sticky window, tightening loose deck boards, replacing a burned-out fixture in the bathroom. Marcus was a patient teacher, explaining techniques without condescension, letting me make mistakes and figure out corrections. His hands were confident and sure, and when he needed to guide mine to show me proper grip or angle, the contact felt natural rather than charged. Well, mostly natural. I was still hyper-aware of every touch, every moment when we stood close enough to share breath, but it was a different kind of awareness now. Acknowledged rather than secret, something we were both navigating instead of something I was experiencing alone. Good, he said as I successfully unseized the kitchen window after 20 minutes of patient work with penetrating oil and gentle pressure. You've got steady hands. Thanks. I worked the window up and down a few times, satisfied with the smooth operation. What's next? Next, we call it a day and figure out dinner. He gathered the tools we'd been using, but instead of heading for the shed, he leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at me. Can I ask you something? Sure. What happened in your life that made you ready for this? He gestured vaguely between us. Because 3 months ago at Christmas, you could barely look at me. And now I can't stop looking at you. Yeah. I thought about the question, about the slow shift that had been happening in my life over the past year, the growing dissatisfaction with work, the series of relationships that felt like playing house with strangers, the increasing sense that I was living someone else's idea of success. I think I got tired of lying to myself, I said finally, about what I wanted, who I was attracted to, what kind of life actually made me happy. And once I started being honest about the small things, the big things got harder to ignore. Things like being attracted to your stepbrother. Things like being attracted to you, I corrected. Not because you're my stepbrother, but in spite of it. If we'd met any other way, we probably would have figured this out years ago. Yeah. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, for what it's worth, I don't think the family thing makes this wrong. Complicated, maybe, but not wrong. What makes you say that? Because wrong things don't feel like this. He pushed off from the counter and took a step toward me, close enough that I had to tip my head back slightly to meet his eyes. Wrong things feel wrong. This feels like something I've been waiting my whole life to figure out. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. And what have you figured out? That I want to kiss you, he said simply, and that I'm tired of pretending I don't. The world seemed to narrow down to the space between us, to the sound of my own breathing and the warmth radiating from his body. I could see the exact moment when his control finally cracked, could see the decision form in his eyes before he reached up to cup my face in both hands. Tell me to stop, he said, his voice rough with want and uncertainty. No. He leaned down and kissed me then, soft and careful at first, like he was afraid I might disappear. But when I kissed him back, when I fisted my hands in his shirt and pulled him closer, something shifted. His mouth became more insistent, his hands threading through my hair, and I felt something inside me catch fire and spread. This was what I'd been waiting for, not just the physical contact, though that was electric enough to make my knees weak, but the recognition, the sense of pieces falling into place, the rightness of it that had nothing to do with logic or family trees or social expectations. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Marcus rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, and I could feel the tremor in his hands where they still cupped my face. Jesus, he breathed. Yeah. That was... I know. We stood there for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing breath, and trying to process what had just shifted between us. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows we just fixed and reminding us that we were alone here, cut off from the normal world by miles of mountain roads and the simple fact of weather. We should eat something, Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to step away. Probably. And talk about this, figure out what it means. Okay. But neither of us moved. We stayed there in the kitchen as shadows lengthened outside, existing in the bubble of space we'd created, reluctant to let the practical world intrude on whatever was happening between us. Finally, Marcus pressed a soft kiss to my forehead and stepped back, though his hands lingered on my shoulders for an extra moment. Pasta? He suggested, his voice almost normal. Pasta sounds good. We moved around each other in the small kitchen with careful choreography, preparing a simple meal while the awareness between us hummed like a live wire. Every accidental touch, reaching past each other for supplies, handing off utensils, felt significant. The kiss had changed something fundamental, had given us permission to acknowledge what we'd been dancing around. "So," I said as we sat down to eat, "what happens when we go back to the real world?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, twirling pasta around his fork with unnecessary precision. "I don't know," he said finally. "What do you want to happen?" "I want not to pretend anymore. I want to see where this goes without worrying about what everyone else thinks. That's not going to be easy." "No," I agreed, "but easy isn't the same as worth it." He looked up at that, something shifting in his expression. "You think this is worth it? The complications, the family drama, all of it?" "I think you are," I said simply. "I think this is. And I think we've spent enough years being careful about other people's comfort that maybe it's time to prioritize our own." Marcus reached across the small table and took my hand, threading our fingers together with deliberate intention. His skin was warm and slightly rough from the day's work, and the simple contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. "Okay," he said. "Let's see where this goes." The second storm hit around 10 o'clock, announced by a rumble of thunder that seemed to roll across the mountains for minutes. We'd moved to the living room after dinner, ostensibly to tend the fire, but really because neither of us wanted to break the spell that had settled over us since that kiss in the kitchen. I sat on one end of the old couch, Marcus on the other, the space between us charged with possibility and uncertainty. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the knotted pine walls. Every few minutes, lightning would illuminate the windows in stark white, followed by the deep rumble that seemed to shake the cabin's bones. "Sounds like it's going to be a long night," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yeah." We'd been making small talk for the past hour, commenting on the weather, discussing tomorrow's drive back to town, anything but the kiss that had changed everything between us, but the awareness remained, thick as smoke in the air between us. Marcus leaned forward to add another log to the fire, and I watched the way the flames caught his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the shadows beneath his eyes. When he settled back against the couch cushions, he was closer than before, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier," he murmured, staring into the fire. "About waiting, about not knowing what you were waiting for. What about it? I think I've been lying to myself for years." He turned to look at me then, and there was something raw in his expression that made my chest tight. "About what I felt for you, about what it meant." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the windows in their frames. In the sudden silence that followed, I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. "I don't know what this is," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't want to stop feeling it." The words hit me like a physical force. I looked at him, really looked, taking in the uncertainty written across his features, the way his hands gripped the couch cushions like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. This was Marcus stripped of his usual quiet confidence, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. I didn't speak at first. Couldn't, really, with everything I was feeling lodged somewhere in my throat. Instead, I shifted closer on the couch, closing the distance between us by degrees until our knees were almost touching. "Marcus," I said, and his name came out rougher than I intended. He turned toward me fully then, and we were close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could count the faint freckles across the bridge of his nose that I'd never noticed before. The space between us felt electric, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. I leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away, to change his mind, to remember all the reasons this was complicated. But he didn't move. If anything, he leaned toward me too until our foreheads were almost touching and I could feel his breath against my lips. The kiss, when it finally happened, was nothing like the one in the kitchen. This was hesitant, tentative, barely more than a brush of lips against lips. But it was also everything, soft and careful and so full of unspoken questions that I felt something in my chest crack open. We broke apart after only a few seconds, breathing hard, foreheads still pressed together. Marcus's eyes were closed, his expression something between wonder and fear. Jesus, he breathed. I know. I've never. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I could see him struggling with something. Not with anyone, not like this. The admission hit me with surprising force, not because I was shocked. I'd suspected as much from the careful way he'd approached the kiss, the uncertainty in his touch, but because it meant we were both stepping into uncharted territory, both figuring this out as we went. Me neither, I said softly. Not like this. Something shifted in his expression at that. Relief, maybe, or recognition. We were in this together, whatever this was. Both of us scared, both of us wanting something we didn't quite know how to name. Marcus reached up and touched my face with those carpenter's hands I'd been thinking about all day, his thumb tracing across my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Are you okay? He asked. Are you? I don't know. I feel like. He shook his head, struggling for words. Like something just changed that I can't change back. Do you want to change it back? No. The answer came immediately, certain in a way that made my heart race. No, I don't. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin felt separate from the world, a pocket of firelight and possibility where normal rules didn't seem to apply. Marcus's hand was still on my face, and I leaned into the touch, letting my eyes drift closed. What are we doing? I asked. I don't know, he said, but I don't want to stop. We stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, sharing breath, existing in the space between one thing and another. Then Marcus shifted on the couch, lying back against the arm and pulling me with him until we were stretched out together, my head on his chest, his arm around my shoulders. It should have felt awkward, this careful navigation of new physical territory. But instead it felt natural, like something we'd been building toward for years without realizing it. Marcus's heartbeat was steady under my ear, and the scent of his skin, soap and sawdust and something uniquely him filled my senses. This is dangerous, he said quietly, his fingers threading through my hair. I know. We weren't really brothers, not by blood, but this still feels like crossing a line no one talks about. I lifted my head to look at him, seeing my own complicated feelings reflected in his expression. He was right. This did feel like crossing a line, venturing into territory that didn't have clear social guidelines or acceptable precedents. Does that make it wrong? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand still moving through my hair in slow, soothing strokes. I don't think so, he said finally, but it makes it complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Is that what this is? Something worth having? The question hung between us, heavy with implications, because if this was something worth having, it meant we'd have to figure out how to navigate family dinners and holiday gatherings and all the ordinary moments where we'd have to pretend we were just stepbrothers, nothing more. I think so, I said. I think you are. Marcus's arm tightened around me, pulling me closer against his side. For a while, we just lay there listening to the storm and the crackle of the dying fire. I could feel the tension slowly leaving his body, could sense him relaxing into this new reality we'd created. I used to watch you, he said suddenly, his voice so quiet I almost missed it over the sound of rain against the windows. What? At family gatherings, Christmas, birthdays, whatever. You'd get this look sometimes, like you were somewhere else entirely, thinking about things the rest of us couldn't see, and I'd wonder what was going on in your head. I turned my face into his shoulder, embarrassed by the admission. Probably thinking about you. Were you really? More than I should have been. His chest rose and fell with a deep breath. I thought I was going crazy. The way I felt about you, it didn't make sense. You were supposed to be my little brother, but I never felt like your brother. No, you felt like something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for. We fell quiet again, both lost in our own thoughts. Outside, the storm seemed to be intensifying, wind howling through the trees, rain hitting the windows and driving sheets. But inside our small circle of firelight, everything felt still and separate. "What happens when we leave this place?" Marcus asked eventually. The question I'd been dreading, the one that made all of this feel temporary and fragile. I thought about going back to my apartment in the city, to my job and my carefully constructed life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I thought about family dinners where we'd have to sit across from each other and pretend nothing had changed. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but right now we're still here. For tonight. For tonight." Marcus's hand found mine in the space between us, our fingers interlacing with careful deliberation. Such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. This conscious choice to connect, to claim this moment, even if we couldn't claim what came after. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Anything. I used to dream about you, not sexual dreams exactly, just dreams where we were different people, where we'd met some other way, where I could look at you the way I wanted to without it being complicated." My throat felt tight. "What way is that?" "Like you were mine," he said simply. "Like I had the right to care about you the way I wanted to." The words hit me with devastating accuracy. That was exactly what I'd been craving without knowing how to name it. The right to care about him openly, to let my feelings show without apology or explanation. "You do have that right," I said. "Maybe not in the way the world expects, but here, now, you have it." Marcus lifted our joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "I love the way you think," he murmured against my skin. "I love the way you are." The words slipped out before I could examine them, honest in the way that darkness and exhaustion sometimes demanded. Marcus went very still beneath me, and I realized what I'd just said, how it might sound. "I mean," I started, but he cut me off with a gentle squeeze of my hand. "I know what you mean," he said, "and I feel the same way." We didn't say the actual word. Love was too big, too complicated for what we were figuring out between us. But the feeling was there, acknowledged in the careful way we held each other, in the tenderness of every touch. Thunder crashed overhead, followed immediately by a flash of lightning so bright it illuminated the entire room. In that moment of stark white light, I saw Marcus's face clearly, the soft expression, the way he was looking at me like I was something precious and fragile. Then the lights flickered. We both froze, suddenly reminded that we weren't the only forces at work in the world. The old cabin's electrical system was temperamental under the best circumstances, and this storm was testing every connection. The lights flickered again, longer this time, before finally giving up entirely. We were plunged into darkness broken only by the dying fire, and in that sudden absence of artificial light, everything felt more immediate, more real. "Power's out," Marcus said unnecessarily. "Yeah." But neither of us moved to do anything about it. We stayed curled together on the couch, listening to the storm rage outside and feeling oddly grateful for the darkness that made everything simpler. No need to worry about expressions or body language or any of the visual cues that might give us away. Just touch and warmth and the sound of each other's breathing. "Are you cold?" Marcus asked after a while. "A little." He reached for the heavy wool blanket draped over the back of the couch, shaking it out and pulling it over both of us. The movement brought us even closer together until we were pressed against each other from shoulder to hip. I could feel every point of contact, his arm around my shoulders, my hand resting on his chest, the way our legs tangled together beneath the blanket. It was intimate without being sexual, tender in a way that felt almost more dangerous than desire. "This is nice," I said quietly. "Yeah, it is." We lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm and trying not to think about tomorrow, about what it would mean to leave this place and go back to our separate lives, about how we'd navigate family gatherings and holidays and all the careful choreography of being stepbrothers who were something more. "I don't want this night to end," Marcus said eventually. "Then let's not let it, not yet." But even as I said it, I could see the first faint lightening of the sky outside the windows. Dawn was still hours away, but time felt suddenly precious, finite in a way it hadn't before. Marcus seemed to sense it too. His arm tightened around me, and I felt him press a soft kiss to the top of my head. "Whatever happens," he said, "I want you to know that tonight was real. What I feel for you is real." "I know. It's real for me too." "Good." His voice was getting drowsy, and I could feel the tension leaving his body as exhaustion finally caught up with him. "That's good." I listened as his breathing deepened and evened out, felt the moment when sleep claimed him. But I stayed awake longer, memorizing the weight of his arm around me, the sound of his heartbeat, the way it felt to be held by someone who saw me clearly and wanted me anyway. Outside, the storm gradually spent itself, rain gentling to a steady patter against the windows. I must have dozed eventually, because the next thing I knew, pale gray light was filtering through the windows and Marcus was stirring beside me. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." We didn't move apart immediately. Instead, we lay there in the growing light, both of us aware that daylight meant decisions, meant facing the reality of what we discovered between us in the darkness. "The storm stopped," Marcus observed. "Yeah. Roads will probably be clear by this afternoon." Probably. Neither of us stated the obvious. That clear roads meant going home, meant leaving this pocket of possibility and returning to the complicated reality of our regular lives. Finally, Marcus sat up, running a hand through his hair in the gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of buying time to think. "I should start coffee," he said. "Check the generator." "Okay." But he didn't move immediately. Instead, he looked down at me, still curled under the blanket, and something shifted in his expression. "About last night," he started. My stomach clenched. This was it. The moment where he'd remember all the reasons this was impossible, where he'd backtrack and try to put us back in our separate boxes. "What about it?" I asked carefully. "I don't regret it," he said simply. "Any of it. I need you to know that." Relief flooded through me, so strong it left me dizzy. "I don't regret it either." "Good." He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, a gesture that felt both intimate and somehow final. "Coffee?" "Please." I watched him disappear into the kitchen, listened to the familiar sounds of morning routine, the camp stove lighting, water being poured, the quiet clink of mugs. Normal domestic sounds that felt strange and precious after everything that had shifted between us. When I finally got up and joined him in the kitchen, we moved around each other with careful choreography. Not the awkward distance of before, but something new, an awareness that was acknowledged rather than hidden, but still too fragile to examine too closely. "Generator's working again," Marcus said, handing me a steaming mug. "Storm must have knocked a branch against the fuel line." "So we have power." "We have power." We stood there drinking coffee and looking out at the dripping forest, both of us aware that modern conveniences meant we could leave whenever we wanted. The mountain roads would be passable within a few hours, and there was no practical reason to stay longer. "I should probably head back today," I said eventually. "I've got that presentation Monday morning." "Right, work." The word hung between us, representing everything we'd have to return to, jobs and responsibilities and the careful social structures that didn't have a place for what we'd discovered between us. "What about you?" I asked. "I'll probably stay another day, make sure everything's properly secured before winter." He was quiet for a moment. Give myself time to think. About us, he didn't say, but I heard it anyway. We spent the morning finishing the repairs we'd started the day before, small tasks that gave us excuses to work side by side without having to talk about the larger questions hanging over us. The window that had been sticking operated smoothly now. The loose deck boards were secure. The cabin was in better shape than it had been in years. "Dad will be pleased," I said as we put away the tools. "Yeah, but the mention of our parents brought reality crashing back, reminded us that we'd have to face them eventually, would have to navigate family dinners and holiday gatherings with this new awareness between us." "Marcus," I started, but he shook his head. "Let's not talk about it yet," he said. not until we have to. So we didn't talk about it. Instead, we cleaned the cabin and packed up the leftover supplies, moving through the familiar rituals of closing up the place for another season. But underneath the practical tasks, I could feel the weight of everything unspoken, everything we'd have to figure out once we left this mountain sanctuary. By early afternoon, my car was packed and the cabin was ready for winter. There was no reason to delay anymore, no practical excuse to extend this strange interlude between one version of our relationship and whatever came next. We stood on the porch one last time, looking out at the forest that had witnessed our transformation. The sun was shining now, making the wet trees sparkle like something out of a fairy tale. It was hard to believe that just 12 hours ago, we'd been lying together under a blanket, crossing lines we'd never even known existed. "Well," I said finally, "I guess this is it." "Yeah." Marcus walked with me down to where my car was parked at the edge of the clearing. We stopped beside the driver's door, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to say. How do you say goodbye to someone who's just become everything and nothing all at once? "Drive carefully," he said finally. "Roads will still be slick." "I will." I opened the car door, then turned back to look at him one more time. He was standing with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, that same careful expression he'd worn at 100 family gatherings. But now I knew what it was hiding, knew about the thoughts he kept locked away behind that quiet exterior. "Marcus," I said, and he looked up sharply at the tone in my voice. "Yeah. Last night, it meant something. To me, I mean. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or relief. It meant something to me, too. We looked at each other across the small space between us, and I felt the weight of everything we weren't saying, everything we still had to figure out. Then, I got in the car and started the engine, because staying longer would only make it harder. I was halfway down the muddy drive when I heard him call my name. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the same spot, hands still in his pockets, watching me leave. I stopped the car and rolled down the window, waiting. His voice, when it came, was quiet and shaky, barely audible over the sound of the engine. "If you ever come back, I'll be waiting." The words hit me like a physical force, carrying more weight than any declaration of love or promise of forever. Because they meant he understood what I was feeling, the fear and confusion and desperate hope all tangled together. They meant he was willing to take the risk too, to see where this impossible thing between us might lead. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and put the car back in drive. In the mirror, I watched him until the trees swallowed him up, until the cabin and the clearing and everything that had happened there disappeared behind a curtain of green. But his words followed me down the mountain, echoing in my mind with each mile that carried me back toward ordinary life. "If you ever come back, I'll be waiting." I would come back. I knew that with sudden crystalline certainty. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but soon. Because what we'd found in that storm-dark cabin was too precious to abandon, too real to pretend away. The road stretched out ahead of me, winding down through the mountains toward whatever came next. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because somewhere behind me, in a cabin that smelled like sawdust and possibility, someone was waiting for me to find my way back home. And maybe that was enough to build everything else on.